Hey guys, so a couple days ago I showed you my Butterfly and a couple of you actually liked my Butterfly, so I figured this week I'll talk to you a bit more about my Butterfly. Now before you guys think I'm a pervert, I'm still talking about my HTC Butterfly. It's a brand new phone with a 1080p screen that was just launched a couple days ago in India. Now the first time we heard of this phone was when it was announced in Japan as the HTC Butterfly. And then the phone suddenly popped up in North America as the Verizon Droid DNA. Now unlike the Japanese and the US variants of the HTC Butterfly, this doesn't have LTE or NFC, shocking, but it does have a micro SD card slot. Now I'll admit, when I first heard the name HTC Butterfly, I wasn't really a big fan of it. Mostly because in my mind I was thinking of possible scenarios where this name could backfire.
Whoa, what phone is that? It's a Butterfly.
So yeah, the name is a little awkward and strange and the name of a flying insect, but the phone is actually nothing like a flying insect at all. It seems like every flagship phone from an Android manufacturer in 2013 is gonna have a 1080p screen. So far we've been doing just fine on 720p resolution screens, so let's see if a 1080p makes that much of a difference on a mobile phone. I'll admit the HTC Butterfly makes a really good first impression when you first hold it in your hand. It's really slim and it's really lightweight as well, and not to mention it looks really nice because of its minimalistic styling. The design of the HTC Butterfly is a new thing that HTC is trying with their latest devices. It's very similar to the HTC 8X Windows Phone, which has tapered edges just like the Butterfly. It also uses the same soft touch finish at the back, which is nice on different colors, but on the black matte variant, as you can see, it picks up a lot of fingerprints and smudges. It's very obvious that HTC has tried to make the Butterfly as ergonomic as possible, and it feels very comfortable in your hand in spite of the 5-inch screen. There are some things that are mildly annoying and a little puzzling too. For instance, you have the power and screen lock button located at the center of the top of the HTC Butterfly. This means it's a little hard to use without holding the phone in a very awkward grip. I feel like having it located on the right side of the phone would have been a better idea. Apart from that, you also have the standard 3.5mm audio jack and a large housing which contains the micro SIM card slot and a micro SD card slot as well. They're both covered with a plastic flap that is a bit hard to open. The main reason for the plastic flap is that HTC has made the Butterfly water resistant, so while it might not survive a swim with you, it can actually survive a couple of splashes. The same flap is also at the bottom covering the micro USB charging port, which can be a little tedious to open every day when you charge the phone. On the right side you have the volume rocker key, which is easy enough to use and find, but it is a little flush, so some folks might find it a little hard to use. Likewise, the left side is also minimal with no ports or buttons, but it has the same perforated metal aluminum strips on either side. According to HTC, this is apparently inspired by the design of sports cars. At the back you have the usual minimalistic styling with the soft touch back and the HTC logo, and the finish, which we already told you, is a bit of a fingerprint magnet. Towards the bottom you have the usual speaker grill made up of micro drilled holes. Right below, the Beats Audio logo. One cool thing about the HTC Butterfly is that it has a notification light at the back. Now this can be very useful in case you put your phone flat down a lot. It's a small idea, but it comes in very useful. And then of course there is the 1080p 5-inch display. Made out of Gorilla Glass 2, this 5-inch Super LCD 3 screen is at 1920 by 1080 pixels resolution, which results in a magnificently crisp pixel density of 440 ppi. By comparison, the iPhone 5 has a pixel density of 326 ppi and the Galaxy Note 2 has 267. And as such, you really get blown away by the display on the HTC Butterfly because it is really crisp, and watching a 1080p movie is insanely clear on the screen. And if you're reading a book, you'll notice that texts are very clear and crisp as well. Previously, the best display we saw on a mobile phone was the HTC One X, but now that's been one-upped by the HTC Butterfly. Now, put the two together and you won't actually notice that much of a difference between the screens unless you really look very close. But that's not really a very comfortable angle to look at the screen. This difference between 720p and 1080p isn't as big as the difference between QHD and 720p. As such, going from a 1080p screen back to a 720p screen isn't that big of a step down. But there's one thing for sure, after you use this for a week, you can never go back to QHD resolution because you just get so used to how crisp everything and how gorgeous everything looks. To find a pixel on this, you're gonna have to really look hard. So yes, as nice as a 1080p screen is, a 720p resolution screen is also pretty okay. Now above the screen you have a 2.1 megapixel front-facing camera, which comes in very useful because it's a wide-angle lens. This means you can actually take a picture of you and a couple of friends nearby. For example, I can get a picture of me and everything else around me as well, and that is actually pretty impressive. This means if you're a fan of self-portrait pictures, this is probably the phone for you. Below the screen you have the usual Android 4.0 capacitive touchscreen buttons for back, home and recent apps. Stepping aside and looking at it, the HTC Butterfly is actually a work of art. It's not necessarily a design that'll stand out from a crowd of rectangular touchscreen phones, but it sure does look and feel great in your hand. Alright, and talking about specs, the HTC Butterfly is powered by a quad-core 1.5 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon S4 Pro processor with an Adreno 320 GPU, 2 GB of RAM and 16 GB of onboard memory with a micro SD card slot as well. This all means that things are super fast and super smooth, and I was actually kind of impressed with the overall speed of operation. HTC Sense is a fairly heavy UI, but the interface was still responsive and apps still loaded quickly. Coming to software, the HTC Butterfly runs Android 4.1 Jelly Bean with HTC Sense 4 Plus UI on top of it. We've already spoken about what's new with HTC Sense 4 Plus in our HTC One X review, so you can check out that for a more detailed idea. HTC adopted a more minimalistic look to HTC Sense, and while it's still a heavy UI, it's actually pretty good looking now. Of course, that being said, whether you like the interface or not is ultimately a personal preference. Coming to multimedia, you have the same gallery and video player as the One X and Sense 4 before it, but you also have the music player with Beats Audio built in. And Beats Audio on the HTC Butterfly actually has a significant boost in power thanks to a 2.5 volt amplifier built in, which means there's more than enough bass to rattle your brain. Coming to internet browsing, you also have Chrome pre-installed as part of Jelly Bean, but you also have the default HTC Sense browser available too, which has Flash support but is turned off by default. At the end of the day, HTC Sense 4 Plus is basically built around showing off the best parts of Android 4.1 Jelly Bean, and that's just fine with me. Now, it might not have as many features thrown in as Samsung's TouchWiz UI or LG's Optimus UI or even Sony's Xperia UI, but HTC Sense is really minimalistic in its look and it doesn't actually get in the way of Android. I know some of you might not agree with me there, and hey, if you don't like it, that's just fine because you can always install a different icon pack, a different theme or a different launcher. Now, talking about the camera, the HTC Butterfly has an 8 megapixel autofocus rear camera with an f2.0 aperture, 28mm wide angle lens and a backside illuminated sensor, which all means that the camera quality is actually pretty good. I noticed that the camera quality wasn't as great as the iPhone 5 or the Nokia Lumia 920, but it was still pretty good. It was actually slightly better than the camera on the One X, which wasn't too shabby either. The camera is also powered by the same image sense technology that HTC has used on the One series before last year. HTC's image sense ISP chip also allows for the unified camera interface that lets you take pictures or videos without switching screens, and you can also take a photo while recording a video, which comes in very handy a couple of times. Camera app is actually pretty snappy, taking pictures even faster than the One X Plus did. Camera quality was overall more sharper and detailed compared to the HTC One X, with natural colors and pretty good overall shots, but pictures in low light were pretty decent, not too great because of the aggressive noise compression algorithm that kind of smears out details. Now, because of that full HD screen, I was a little bit worried about battery life. Thankfully, it seems like my worries were not an issue at all because the HTC Butterfly actually lasted longer than the LG Optimus View, another 5-inch phone out there. Battery life isn't quite as good as the HTC One X Plus, but it's much better than the HTC One X from last year. I imagine HTC has made a lot of improvements to the power management of the devices, but I also think that Qualcomm's Snapdragon processor used for this phone is less power hungry than Nvidia's Tegra processors which were used for the last batch of phones. Under moderate usage, you could probably get through a typical 8 or 12 hour workday with the HTC Butterfly, though you might want to charge it up at office if you are heading out for an evening with friends. So is the HTC Butterfly recommendable? Actually, I think it is. HTC has done a great job with this phone. It is really light, really slim, and it is amazing how they managed to dump that much tech in something that slim. I still maintain that the name is completely ridiculous, but I think the display more than makes up for it. There are some things I do worry about though. For instance, distance, the battery life is okay, but still a bit of a worry, so you will have to carry around a battery pack. So if you're thinking about buying this phone, know that you will probably have to invest in an extra charger or a portable charger as well. So yeah, it's a tough call because the HTC Butterfly is really a beautiful phone. It looks great, the screen is fantastic, and to be very honest, if you do buy this phone, I imagine you're going to be very happy with it and not regret it at all. But hey, don't just take my word for it, check out our detailed review over at unleashthephones.com. And as always, if you guys have any questions, do let me know right in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because that's the cool thing to do. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching, guys.